You're listening to Being Autistic. I'm your host, Shelly, and I am a 50-year-old woman sharing my experiences about what it's like to grow up knowing I was different but not knowing why, how I learned I was on the autism spectrum, and what it's like to be autistic. Hello, everyone. In this episode, I'm going to talk about styles of autistic thinking, specifically all or nothing thinking, which is pretty common, and negative thinking, which is basically where you have a bias towards focusing or finding the negative aspects in things rather than, or I should say, in addition to the positives. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that. But first, I'm going to talk about, in general, the autistic brain thinks differently about many things in all areas of life. There's almost too many examples to even go through because really, when you think about it, everything about the world, about your life, you are going to, if you are autistic, you are going to have a different viewpoint and your brain will process information differently. And that all includes the way that your brain thinks, the thoughts that you have. And I've noticed this, like I said, in every part of my life, literally every part of my life. And it would be way too long of an episode if I talked about everything. So I'm going to talk mostly about the ways that our brains think when it comes to things that we might perceive as a problem. So problematic thinking, which I'm sure you've experienced this with neurotypical people pointing this out to you. They'll say, why are you always thinking so negatively? Or why are you always thinking black and white so much? Like, you're not seeing... It's hard to explain how they say this to me, but it really bothers me because I cannot help the way that my brain thinks. I can't really... I mean, yes, we can have control, I guess you could say, over our thoughts, but not so much because, like, I've been trying my whole life to control my thinking, and it just does not work. I mean, it might work in some situations, it might work temporarily, but I really, truly don't believe, this is my personal belief, that at least I cannot change my thinking to the point where it's not just black and white and it's not just negatives and positives. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here let's start with the all or nothing, black and white thinking. This is very common. So one example of this could be somebody that has a couple of options for something that they have to choose. This could be where they want to live, what job they want to take, anything like that, a person they want to date. So the person or the job or the location they want to live in, it's all going to have factors, things about it that are good or bad. And in order to make choices, this is how our brains work. Our brains just try to decide by getting the facts, getting the information. What are the facts? What do I know for sure? What's the good things? What are the positives about this situation? What are the bad things, the negatives? And I believe this is how my brain works. I can only make a decision when I've fully exhausted every single negative and positive about it. I often make pros and cons lists for everything if it's a major decision, and sometimes even if it's a small decision. And, this is actually something that I think is a good thing. I really feel that it's kind of like a superpower, I guess, for me, that my brain does this because other people's brains don't seem to look at the full picture. And that might sound contradictory because when you say black and white thinking is only including the two extremes, it's not including the middle. So how can that be the full picture? But I'm kind of realizing now, lots of things about autism are extremes. Even the thing when it comes to hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. Most people kind of operate from one extreme to the other, or they're only on one end of that extreme, and that's how thinking is. But both of them together, it's kind of like the yin yang. If you've ever seen the yin yang symbol, where it's the white and black, There's a little bit of black in the white, there's a little bit of white in the black, and they're even. They're completely balanced. I feel like the autistic brain has an easier time balancing these two polarities, these two extremes. Because if we are looking only at the positives, which is what most people say to do, they're like, stop thinking so negatively. Think about the positives in this situation. It's not that we're not looking at the positives. We are trying to be real. We're trying to be truthful and find the truth of, sure, there might be a positive, there might be 3 or 4 positives, but you can't just base your decision on that. You have to look at the full picture, which includes the negative too. And so with all or nothing thinking, this comes in, I think perfectionism plays into this too. A lot of autistics are perfectionists for this reason, because we don't want to do anything or make any choices that are going to cause us further distress down the line. We want to make the best choice possible for our comfort, for our safety, for our enjoyment, for our mental wellness. So when we're looking at these options, we're going to want to see all of the options, not just the positive. And that way, we have a full picture. And I feel like, and I want to also mention this. I've ran into problems with this when it comes to the way that the autistic brains think. If you've ever heard of the law of attraction or manifestation, I was really into that for the longest time. And it's like 100% positive. And that's where I had the problem with it, because it was not looking at the negatives. And so my brain thought, nothing can be completely positive. I don't think there's too many things in this world that are 100% positive, and where you're supposed to focus only on the good stuff, and if something bad is happening regarding that, that means you're doing it wrong. And so after so many years of being into things like manifestation and the law of attraction, I realized they're not looking at the full picture. They're looking at the biased of being positive, which I cannot be. My brain just cannot look at the positives and not look at the negatives. So that was a thing that I had to realize was not right for me. And so I don't really talk about manifestation or law of attraction anymore. I don't really follow it, because let's be real, things are not going to go your way just because you want them to. And I know there's a lot of things that go into that, but and then I posted this on a couple Facebook groups a few times. I was like, are autistic brains just not able to manifest things? I have never been able to manifest my dream life. And people might say it's because you focus on the negative too much. And then that goes back to the thing I just said. I don't focus on the negative. It's just that I want to be aware of the negative and the positive. And here's where all or nothing plays into it. If there are too many negatives, or if there are even equal amounts of negatives and positives about something, then my brain is going to go way to the other end and say, forget all these positives, there's too many negatives, or there's not enough positives, so that in my mind that thing becomes bad. Because I can no longer accept it as an option when it needs to be balanced in the favor of positive, and that's how any decision of mine needs to go. And so I will find these decisions nearly impossible to make. I just get, and people might say, yeah, you're being a perfectionist. Not everything is perfect. And I know that. I know that there are some options out there that, nothing's going to be perfect, but why can't there be something, of all the unlimited possibilities in the world, why can't there be any options that are like 99% positive or 95%, or I'd even take 90%. But there's always so many negatives, and and this is where the autistic brain is different in that way, because we find the negatives easier, and that is a thinking style of the brain the autistic brain that I feel is it's like a double-edged sword. Well, maybe that's a bad analogy. I think it's a superpower, but it also hurts us because, like I said, then you're really good at finding all of the good and the bad things about something, but that makes all of the things bad then because there's just not enough good to make up for the bad. And then my logical mind also thinks like this. I think, well, how much weight do I want to put on each of those criteria? So, for example, let's say I'm trying to take a job, and my main criteria in a job is location. So that's going to take up most of the bonus points, so you might want to call it. But then I don't really care so much about maybe the hours, so that wouldn't have as much weight. So that would tip the scales a little bit more. And so this is kind of going not off topic, but just a little tangent. Not a tangent, but another thought that I just had. They have these things online. I just love them because it's such a good tool for my brain. It's like a decision-making tool that lets you choose, or you write down all of your choices, choice one, or choice two, choice three, whatever, how many you have. And then it says, what are the criteria of each one, and how much weight do you put to each criteria? So like I just said, if you were doing a job, you would say, the location gets this many points, the hours gets this many points, the job itself gets this many points. And then you arrange or you give a score to each of those criteria depending on how much it would line up with your goals. And so there's another section of the tool where it will say, what are your goals? What's important to you? Your values. So, then you go down those lists, and then you will go through each one and say, how does the location of this job fit into my goal or value here? And then you put a number. It's all based on numbers, like a scale. And then when you're done filling out the whole entire thing, you add up each column, and it actually calculates scientifically, mathematically, your result. What would be the best for you based on all of these criteria, how much weight all the criteria get, how much each criteria fulfills your values and what you want, and then you got your number and it tells you what your answer is. So that's a very calculated way to do it. And there's a lot of these tools online. I can't really remember offhand what the like URL is of them or the website, but if you type in like decision making tool, you should see a bunch of them. I actually created one myself that's based on that, so it's kind of like a manual way I do it, not on the computer, I do it on paper. But that's how I make decisions, and the best way to make those decisions is to know the good and the bad, and so the pros and cons lists. But there's a flaw with pros and cons lists because they really balance each other out. If you take every single pro and then you flip it around and make the con be the opposite, you're really just balancing out. So you kind of need to do it a more detailed, more intricate way that covers all the bases and is like, like I said, the mathematical precision decision maker. So when it comes to all or nothing thinking, then when it comes to making those decisions, I still struggle with that because, like, let's say I do that and I get my answer and I think, okay, here's my answer. But then sometimes I'll be like, oh God, then my negative thinking comes back and I say, but that option was this and it had these negatives to it. And then I'll sit and think about, oh, do I really want to do it because of those things? And, usually those decision makers are pretty accurate, but that's the negative thinking bias that I do not think is a superpower, really, because like I've kind of had discussions with my therapist recently about this, where she said, if you focus on the negative too much, that's what causes your anxiety. And spoken simply, yes, it is a cause of anxiety to focus on negativity. But then, see, even now I just said, but my brain goes to, but, yeah, but, then I have an answer for that. Like, so my answer for that is usually, but I can't make the decision without knowing all the facts, and I need to weigh the pros and cons. And she says, yes, do that, but then don't focus on the negative. And then I say, well, the negative is it's like a bigger issue than the positive. So I feel like I need to focus on the negative for that reason, because it's more important, really. So, like, I don't want to make a decision that's going to involve me having to do something that I am 100% against, even if it does have a lot of positives to it. And that is why most of the decisions that I've ever made in my life, I feel like, sure, I made the best decision that I could based on the information, based on the pros and cons, but there were still negatives to it, and that made it an imperfect decision, and it still sucked because I still had things that I had to deal with that I didn't want to deal with. And that's where being autistic gives us a little bit more of an issue there, because I feel like most neurotypical people, their baseline is positive. They don't have constant stress and depression like most autistic people do. They don't have struggles in the world to the extreme that autistic people do. And so I think that autistic brains focus on the negative more because we have to know them. We have to know these negatives because they're really going to affect us more than they affect other people. And so those negatives have more weight. They're more of a big deal. And, if somebody is listening to this that is not autistic and does not struggle with anxiety and depression that is related to autism, they're not going to understand this, I'm sure. They're probably just going to think you have to change your mindset. And that's such an aggravating sentence for me when people say that, because to me, the mindset it's very, very much, yes, it's malleable, but it's also biased because it's from so many things. There's so many factors in that. If you are autistic and you're listening to this, you probably know what I'm trying to say, but I'm having a hard time finding the words. Like, our brains lean towards a certain way of thinking. Yes, you can change your mindset maybe temporarily, maybe with the help of some medications or drugs or something. Or, it might be the situation. It might be the environment. Those things will really have a big impact on how the autistic brain is, how it thinks, how it functions. Like, if you have things that really bother you, you are going to probably have problems controlling your thinking when you're in that situation. And I think most people are like that. Even neurotypical people, if they're in an extremely stressful situation that's something that they're not enjoying at all and it's causing trauma, their brain isn't going to just suddenly shift into positive thinking. And, you can't just change your mindset when you're under stress, I don't believe. I think there are things you can do to handle it, to control it, and I don't like the word control there, to manage it, but I don't think it's a permanent thing. I think autistic people have a baseline of either being maybe neutral or leaning a little bit more towards the negative. And I am not speaking for all autistic people here, because I know that there's a lot of happy autistic people out there that never feel anxiety or depression. It's just not many of them. And in that case, it would be someone that is clearly enjoying their job and, that has good support system in place and is good financially. They've got a good place to live. In that situation, yes. And I've even had moments in my life where everything's lined up and I was pretty happy, but it still wasn't perfect, and it's not like I never was negative or stressed out or thinking negatively in those situations. It was tolerable. But the majority, from what I've learned anyway, and I've heard so many autistic people talking, because it's kind of become a special interest of mine. Like, I'm always listening to podcasts and YouTube videos, so I'm getting the perspective of like probably hundreds now of autistic people, and even talking to them in the Facebook groups that I'm in. The majority of them struggle with anxiety, depression, negative thoughts, and just feeling like they just can't get over that hump of where their brain, the way that their brain thinks. So there might be somebody out there that has been able to overcome anxiety and depression naturally without medications. Like I said, I think that the situations and the conditions in their life have to line up just right, because there's always something that is just a little bit more harder for us than for neurotypical people. And so it's just increases our odds of these situations happening that cause us negative thinking. And like I said, perfection plays into this too. And procrastination plays into this. This is why making decisions is hard, because how do you make a decision when there is no perfect decision, and you really can't, because by making a choice, you're choosing something that has negative things about it that you don't want to deal with. And so you procrastinate on making that decision. I think there's actually a term for this called analysis paralysis, where you just get, and oh my God, I probably spent most of my life in this state, because I'm always faced against decisions that I just procrastinate on making because I cannot stop and analyzing them. I feel like it never ends. Like, I can make my pros and cons list and I can do my decision maker tool, but then I feel like my brain, there it goes again, it tells me, but wait, there's probably something you still don't know about this situation. There's unknowns that you can't know until after you decide. There are probably, more things that I just didn't research enough. And so then I'll be in the loop of researching again for another day, week, month. And I'm like, oh, I don't know when to stop researching, because I'm still kind of learning more things about this. And so it just becomes a giant loop of procrastination, trying to find the perfect choice, being stuck in negativity, and thinking, if this ain't the right choice, then it's not the right choice. And if it's not all positive, it's not the right choice. And that's where the all or nothing thinking comes in. And the black and white thinking, it's all related, I think. It's all tied together. It's like my mind right now is picturing a giant knot of cords and strings that are tied in knots. Like, here's the string of negativity bias, and here's the string of black and white thinking. Here's the string of procrastination because you don't know what to do. Here's the string of indecision. They all tangle up into a ball, and how do you unravel that ball? I struggle with this, and I think I'm always going to struggle with this, because, like I said, even if I do use that tool to make the most accurate, best decision that I can possibly make in that moment, the way that my brain thinks is going to interject and say, things can change. You might not have all the information. You might not even feel the same in a month or two. And that's another thing about it. Like, I think that autistic people know themselves better than other people. Well, obviously we do. We're so misunderstood. Nobody really understands how our brains operate besides us. And so other people look at us and say, I don't understand why this is so hard for you. And then we're saying, like, it just is, and it's too much to explain. Like, everything that I've said in this podcast episode so far has been my attempt at trying to explain why our brains think the way they do. And it's probably, our brains are wired this way neurologically. It's a developmental thing when we were not even born yet. And so I don't like this burden of having to explain when, like, let's say, how would you ask a neurotypical person to explain how they run? Explain to me how your legs and arms move and how they swing back and forth in the way that they do to make your body move forward at a certain speed. How do you do that? Explain to me how your body does that. And then they're going to say, well, why should how do you even explain it? You just do it. It's just natural. Everybody does it. And that's my answer. Our brains just are naturally like this. How do I even explain it? I hate that we have to explain how we are. We have to find the words to explain how our brains are. And now I'm getting Inception vibes from this because I'm sitting here going, whoa, my brain is thinking about how my brain is thinking. And it's thinking of how to explain in a way that other brains can understand how my brain is thinking. And so it's just kind of boggling. It's kind of mind-boggling. And like here's how I'm going to sum it all up. I'm going to say that I truly feel that we cannot change how our brains think. We can change to some extent, sometimes, but I truly don't believe that we can completely overhaul our entire brain's functionality when it comes to how we think, how we make decisions, how we see the world. I mean, yes, we can slightly see, I sometimes can think, sure, I see what you're saying here. If a neurotypical person is trying to explain something to me, and I'm gonna look at it and go, yeah, I see why you think that, but I see it in such a different way that I see more than what they see, and that makes my vision different. It makes my mindset different. And who's to even say, people are always like, change your mindset and that will make you happier. And I really, really, really hate when people say, just be happy. I think there was even a song about this. Yeah, it was called Don't Worry, Be Happy. Sure, it's uplifting and it might make you feel good while you're listening to it, but nobody in the history of the universe has ever been able to just be happy when a minute ago they were not. There's different extremes to that, but what I'm talking about is someone that's had their whole entire life, they've never been able to just switch their happiness on. I think happiness, and this is probably going off on a different tangent as well, but I think it kind of can be related because on the subject of thinking yourself happy, I think that there's too much. It's too intricate of a subject. There's so many factors that go into happiness. There's financial happiness, there's social happiness, there's the happiness of you're living your life purpose kind of happiness. There's your immediate what's the word I'm thinking of? Not your location, your surroundings, your immediate surroundings. If that's, let's say you're in a car accident and you're laying there injured, obviously you're not going to be happy. I think happiness is not something that you can just snap your fingers and be. I think and especially for autistic brains, I think that we have, it wouldn't be the way it is if it wasn't the way it is. We would not have the high suicide rates that we have. We would not have the high unemployment rates that we have. if it weren't for the way that our brains think. So I think at this point I'm probably just repeating myself, saying it in different ways. So maybe I should talk a little bit about, even though I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer to how to stop all or nothing thinking or black and white thinking or negative bias. Although, like I said, the best I can do is to look at it as, your brain can see things other people can't. Your brain can see more gray area, which is kind of strange because all or nothing black and white thinking is where I don't want this thing at all because it's not perfect. Or this thing is amazing, there's nothing wrong with it. And that's all a perspective thing too. But on the other hand, I think autistic brains, since we are so good at spotting details, we can see the full picture, but I think it's a really weird thing. I hope I'm explaining myself correctly. We can see every detail, good and bad, but we also have negative bias to the point where something good can become bad. And like I kind of touched on this, but I'll say this again. Even something that's got bad things in it, you could have such a black and white thinking on it that you could just think that it's, rose-colored glasses comes to mind. And this happens when you meet a new person that you like. If you're dating and you just like, oh, you're head over heels for them, this person is perfect. That everybody's been there, or hope most people have, where you just think that person is literally perfect and they're perfect for you, and oh, this better work, there's nothing wrong with this person at all. That is also an example of black and white thinking, but that's an example where you truly are influenced by your brain chemicals, your happy chemicals that are like trying to get you to procreate. And I think that's why the human brain does that. When you meet someone that you really like, it tries to get you to focus on the positives only, because biology wants you to procreate. And if you see the bad things in everybody, you're not going to procreate with nobody. And actually, that's kind of where I'm at. I've always had that, where I can override my brain chemicals, where, sure, I think this person is perfect and I want to be with them and I think they can do no wrong, but I'm still logical about this. I still don't want to have babies with this person. But most people, they just let their body take control, and they're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this person at all. I'm just going to have sex with them, and whatever happens, happens. And I've never been that loose with my thinking, but that is another example of black and white thinking. But I think eventually, everybody knows, you find the bad stuff, bad things start popping up, and maybe that's why I, as an autistic person, have never been that way with a guy that I've been dating, because I'm too balanced that way. I see too many of the bad things, and I have seen bad things in people that I just started dating, and I'll search for the bad things, and I'll, just like anything, I need to see the pros and cons. I need to see the good and the bad, and I need to make my decision based on that, all that information. It's a lot of information. And maybe that's a good place to end this episode now. I've just kind of talked myself into a circle, and I hope that I did not lose you, and I hope that this episode was helpful for somebody out there. I'm sorry that I do not have a cut and dried solution. I don't know if there is one, because, hey, our brains just are the way they are. We can slightly change some things about our brains sometimes. That's how I feel. But I don't think that we cannot change our mindset 100%. Just, that's it. I don't believe that we can. Unless all of the things line up perfectly, but it's not a perfect world, so that's not likely. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you would like to leave a comment on my YouTube channel about this episode, I would love to hear your thoughts. I put all of my episodes up on my YouTube channel so that people can talk to each other and it just gives me more of an audience because, frankly, I think there's way more people on YouTube than there are on wherever you're listening to this podcast. So check that out. I will leave a link in the show notes so that you can get to the YouTube channel. And thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again next week.